Welcome back to the channel. This will be the best wildcard team for GW3 in Fantasy Premier League, and the top 10 captains can be seen on screen. Erling Haaland is top, facing Brighton away, despite that blank against Tottenham Hotspur in Game Week 2. Mohamed Salah is second, with a difficult fixture on paper against Arsenal. Chris Wood is third, facing West Ham at home, who have conceded the most goals of any team in this season's Premier League so far with 8. Bruno Fernandes is fourth, facing Burnley, but he missed that penalty against Fulham. João Pedro is fifth, on the back of a 15-pointer. Matheus Cunha is sixth, and Ismaila Sarr is seventh, which might surprise you, but he scored 5 goals and provided 2 assists last season against Aston Villa across 3 matches. He really tormented Unai Emery's side, and across his career, he has 7 goals against the Villains. Brian Mbeumo is 8th, the informed Richarlison is 9th, and Ollie Watkins is 10th, despite the fact that Aston Villa haven't scored a single Premier League goal this season. So stay tuned for even more videos. If you want to see a free hit squad and a predicted lineups, then let me know down in the comment section below and show support to this video. Let's get it to over 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards new goals like 35,000 subscribers. There's also my team selection, which is headed your way, and a reaction stream this weekend on top of that deadline on Saturday. And UCL Fantasy will return after that draw is made on the 28th of August this Friday. So there's plenty to look forward to on this channel for both UCL Fantasy and FPL. If you want to stay up to date, then hit the notification bell and always stay up to date with those pieces of content. There's also my Discord server for every single Premier League update in terms of points, goals, assists, the bonus, the lineups, price changes, you name it. And it's also a great community to be a part of. There's my Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, for the latest FPL updates and UCL Fantasy. The same goes for Blue Sky as well. And be sure to join my FPL and FPL Challenge Leagues. The same goes for my Spotify. Leave a 5-star review on my podcast. It's yet another way of engaging with the content, and you can listen to it as a podcast. But without further ado, let's jump into the best wildcard squad for Game Week 3. At the time of this recording, my squad value is 100.4 million, but using websites like FPL.team, you can actually determine your spending power, which means the amount you can actually use in terms of this 15-man squad, and purchase prices do vary to selling prices as discussed in my recent podcasts, and ultimately I would have 100.1 million to spend on this 15-man squad. I'll start off with the 2 goalkeepers, but it's worth providing an update on Cole Palmer, who would be very popular, of course, in Fantasy Premier League, but he is the most sold player at this point of the game week. So Cole Palmer had a scan on his groin today, and the results are positive, better than he first feared. Nothing serious or too bad showing up, but Chelsea and Cole Palmer will be cautious, and Fulham might come too soon. And that was reported by Salmon Phillips, so that is a very reliable source when it comes to Chelsea. And I think Cole Palmer would be a sell, even though he could be back by the time we get back from the international break in Game Week 4. So that's something else that's worth bearing in mind, and I will be discussing my transfer plans when it comes to Cole Palmer in the team selection. But it's safe to say he won't play a part in this wildcard squad, and I'll find the best alternatives in every single position. It's fairly surprising to see the likes of Matt Sells nowhere near the top of the goalkeeper rankings, and all these Forest defenders have been quite underwhelming so far, but Nico Williams, Aina, Murillo and Milenkovic are all solid options. You could even double up in game weeks like 3, for example, against West Ham at home, where Forest would be right up there for the clean sheet odds. But I think Matt Sells is a solid long-term goalkeeper, and he'll rise up those goalkeeper rankings when it comes to FPL points. The likes of Pickford and Raya are solid long-term options, but they cost 0.5 million more. And in the case of David Raya, he faces Liverpool away next, and the next 4 fixtures are quite poor for Arsenal on paper. There's also Robert Sanchez, who would be a decent long-term acquisition at 5 million, but you've also got Marc Cucurella, who would be the best way of covering Chelsea defensively. So I think there are also different ways of going about it if you want to have that Nottingham Forest and Chelsea defensive coverage. But Matt Sells remains one of my favourite goalkeepers in Fantasy Premier League, despite only scoring 4 points so far this season and 2 goals conceded, one of which was a penalty against Brentford in that 3-1 win back in Game Week 1. And I think Matt Sells will get plenty of saves and bonus points. Martin Dubravka would be the backup. He has 8 points to his name so far this season, and he is such a template pick because of that low price tag, and he's the only 4 million starting goalkeeper. And Burnley don't have great fixtures overall, but they kept that clean sheet against Sunderland in Game Week 2, and I think Dubravka could surprise you from time to time, and he does help you a lot of the bench boost if you decide to use it fairly soon. So I do think this goalkeeper partnership is quite solid. You would start Matt Sells more often than not, but there could be the odd occasion, like we saw in the previous game week, where Dubravka could come in and do a decent job. The changes to the bonus point system last season hampered Pedro Porro's points potential on top of Tottenham Hotspur's dismal Premier League campaign, but they have started the new season under Thomas Frank in a very decent manner. They're showing a lot of promise and potential. They narrowly missed out on the UEFA Super Cup final against Paris Saint-Germain. They beat Burnley 3-0 in Game Week 1, and that was a great performance against Man City at the Etihad. They just seem to be Man City's bogey team, and Tottenham Hotspur, irrespective of their manager, always find a way to get the job done in the Premier League. And Pedro Porro was yellow carded in that early kickoff on Saturday, but he remains the best Tottenham Hotspur defender, and I would rank him significantly higher than Van der Ven, who could be rotated, especially in some of the easier games, considering his injury record, whilst Porro seems a little bit more nailed on in that Tottenham Hotspur side. He's also taken set pieces in the absence of James Maddison. This could change a Tottenham sign, a quality midfielder who can also take those corners and free kicks and do it to a better level than Pedro Porro. But for now, I think he is the best way of covering Tottenham Hotspur defensively, and Christian Romero could be considered because of the DEFCON potential, but he's also fairly injury prone during his time at Tottenham Hotspur. Next up is Cucurella, so that's another premium option in this position, and I think Cucurella is the best way of covering Chelsea defensively. But Robert Sanchez does save you 1 million between the sticks, and that is a great entry point into that Chelsea defence, but I just can't recommend the likes of Reece James or Malo Gusto. They'll rotate plenty of times in that right back spot, and they might even start together from time to time, but you can't guarantee those 35 plus starts as you might do with Cucurella. That's what he did last season in the Premier League, and whilst the Champions League could cause a few other problems for Chelsea and they'll rotate even more, I think Cucurella will still get plenty of game time. Hato is a quality player who can cover for Cucurella, but ultimately he can play as a centre-back, and we might see that happen over time. Cucurella can get DEFCONs, and he also can make plenty of goal line clearances, which is ranked very highly in the bonus point system this season, and he's also going to give you more goals and assists than any other Chelsea defender. Reece James is the only one who can compete in terms of that sort of potential, but I think his injury record and the minutes will also pale in comparison to Cucurella, so I would invest in that 6 million Chelsea defender, and the short-term fixtures are fairly decent. But I'm also going to go for another 5.5 million option here in Daniel Munoz, who got an assist against Nottingham Forest in that 1-1 draw, and he can also get DEFCON, goals, assists, and he's also on some set pieces, but he bombs forward, and I think in the absence of Eze, after that move to Arsenal, we could see Munoz take even more set pieces actually this season, but that will be shared with others, and I discussed this in my reaction stream when I listed some of the set piece takers for Crystal Palace and what Eze's move to Arsenal could mean in terms of who is going to take the free kicks and corner kicks for the Gunners as well. But I think Munoz is a great way of covering Palace defensively, but you've also got Lacroix, who is a defensive contribution machine. Mark Gay, if he stays at the club, alongside Chris Richards, offer good value at 4.5 million, and Mitchell is fairly underrated because of the likes of Lacroix and Daniel Munoz in the same setup. I wouldn't go for Dean Henderson between the sticks though to cover Crystal Palace. I think that was a great option last season in Fantasy Premier League, but not so much this time round. And I think these three would be enough in terms of your premium defensive coverage. That means no Ait Nuri, who could miss the next couple of weeks anyway. Jeremy Frimpong will be back around Game Week 4 or 5 after that international break. And you've also got Jurien Timber, Gabriel Saliba. I think they're all solid picks, and I wouldn't mind them in the long term, but I don't recommend starting them against Liverpool away because the Reds have the best attack in the Premier League. But I'm going to go for some cheaper options now, and he has just returned from suspension. Ezri Konsa is still my favourite 4.5 million defender. You could argue Chris Richards is better, but I wouldn't double up on Palace defensively. And of course we have that matchup in Game Week 3 between Crystal Palace and Aston Villa, which should be a very interesting affair, and that will be a very difficult one to separate because I still think Aston Villa have the better chance of a clean sheet, but their record against Palace is quite shaky, and you could argue the Eagles are a bogey team for them, and Munoz has so much more attacking potential and avenues to points that it might just be worth starting him over Ezri Konsa in Game Week 3. I'll be showing you the lineup later on using the website FPL.team whilst discussing the captaincy as well, but the final defender is going to be a 4 million option, and I think the best choices range from Esteve, if you want to have that Burnley defensive coverage, Goodmanson from Leeds United, and Reynildo. I'm going to go for the latter, and he got DEFCON points in Game Week 2, despite conceding twice, of course, to Burnley in that 2-0 loss, but I think this defensive line is still fairly solid, and Reinildo would only come on if necessary if you have injuries and suspensions, which was the case for me, of course, in the last couple of weeks with Frimpong and Ezri Konsa, but I think this will set you up for the next 6 game weeks at least, and with the defensive line, especially including the goalkeepers, you want set and forget options onto your next wildcard. And of course, remember, the first wildcard is available between game weeks 2 to 19, and the second wildcard will be for the second half of the campaign from game week 20 onwards. And of course, the same goes for every other chip, and only 2 of them could have been used in game week 1, but that was all covered on this channel. It's time to go to the midfield, and despite the injuries to Cole Palmer and Bukayo Saka, there are plenty of options in this position. Cody Gakpo is the 3rd highest scoring midfielder in Fantasy Premier League, and I think he's been brilliant so far this season with 2 assists against Newcastle, and he scored in the Premier League opener against Bournemouth, and it's a nice way of covering Liverpool offensively even without Mohamed Salah. I will be showing a Salah and Haaland draft very soon, but I think ultimately you can cover Liverpool in different ways with the informed Ekitike, who has started his Liverpool career in brilliant fashion, scoring against Newcastle, Bournemouth and Crystal Palace in the Premier League and Community Shield respectively. So I think those 2 would be the best way of compensating for the lack of Mohamed Salah, even over Florian Wirtz, who is still a decent FPL option, and I think he will come good, but so far he has been a massive disappointment in FPL terms. I think the goals and assists will come very soon. Next up is Antoine Semenyo, who faces Tottenham away next, but the short to medium term fixtures are quite decent for Bournemouth, and I always said from the summer that if you look beyond that game week 1 fixture against Liverpool, it does look quite enticing for the Cherries, and Semenyo got his biggest return there with a 15-pointer at Anfield, and he made that game extremely close, and he got an assist, a standard return against Wolves, but you might get some frustrations there with Semenyo, as I did last season, where you start him in those plum fixtures and he might blank sometimes and really frustrate you, and in those difficult games when you're looking to bench him, that's when he comes to life and scores those goals and gets those assists for Bournemouth. But I think Semenyo will be more consistent this season, and he is a talismanic figure for the Cherries right now, and I would rank him higher than Justin Kluivert, who is set to return very soon, and he'll be on penalties. Evanilson up front is still decent, but he has blanked in 2 games so far. Semenyo is the way to go when it comes to Bournemouth, and I'm not going to change my mind about that anytime soon. But the 3rd midfielder is from the same game in Mohamed Kudus. The informed Tottenham midfielder arguably is Brennan Johnson, who scored in both Premier League matches so far, but Kudus has a great record against Bournemouth, despite never scoring against them, because he has a couple of assists to his name against the Cherries, and I think these 2 could coexist and do well in the same game. But just bear in mind that if you are starting Semenyo and Pedro Porro, you do have a clash, of course, for game week 3, but the nature of both of those players is that maybe they can coexist and still get returns in your Fantasy Premier League team, but that is quite rare to see when you've got a midfielder or forward facing one of your defenders. But I do like this sort of structure. You've got 3 mid-priced options in the midfield, and they're going to be very solid throughout the course of the season. And I'm still going to go for Bruno Fernandes, who got DEFCON points against Fulham, which kind of masked that penalty miss against Fulham, but it was still very disappointing, and he was only 1 defensive contribution action away from getting DEFCON points against Arsenal in game week 1, where he also created 5 chances for his teammates. And I think Bruno Fernandes, who is the main penalty taker still, he's going to have so many avenues to points with the goals, assists, set pieces, penalties, and he's also got the DEFCON potential. I would rank him higher than Mateus Cunha and Brian Mbeumo. If you need to get some funds from somewhere, Fernandes to Cunha could be a decent alternative, and I would certainly rank the Brazilian higher than Mbeumo based on pre-season and the 2 matches so far, where I think Cunha's been very lively with the shot volume. He forced great saves from the likes of David Raya and hit the post against Fulham. Amad Diallo is rotating way too much of Diogo Dalot for my liking, and as a right wing back, I would place him slightly lower than Mbeumo and Cunha right now. But against Burnley, if all 3 of them start, I think the goals could be shared between all of them, and Man United would be one of the favourites to win in game week 3 of any Premier League club, despite the fact they haven't won 2 Premier League games in a row under Ruben Amorim. But the final midfielder was brilliant in game week 1, but had that disappointment of being the most transferred in player for game week 2 and blanking. I still think Reinders is a quality FPL option, and at his price and below, he is one of the most exciting picks. I think Moises Caicedo will get DEFCON way more regularly, and he'll be very consistent, giving you 4 points and above in most match days. You've also got Elliot Anderson, who can get DEFCON, but he has been so close in 2 consecutive game weeks, getting 11 defensive actions, just 1 shy of the 12 needed for a midfielder to score 2 2 additional points for defensive contributions. But I think Reinders is going to have that sort of box crashing role which we saw against Wolves, but it also depends on the personnel. So if Rodri and Nico Gonzalez aren't starting, we could see Reinders playing deeper and then Man City go for a very offensive lineup. And we saw that to a certain extent against Tottenham Hotspur, but Rodri made an appearance off the bench against Tottenham, and you also had Nico Gonzalez starting that game. So I think Reinders will have plenty of license to go forward, and at that price and below, and of course he has gone up to 5.7 million now, he is going to be a quality FPL asset in the long run. And Man City's fixtures are quite decent from an attacking side, but I don't think defensively they'll keep that many clean sheets, and that's why I discussed from the very beginning of this season. So I think Reinders would be a very good way of covering Man City offensively, but the very best lies up front. It's not exactly rocket science to declare Erling Haaland as the best FPL forward, but is he worth 14 million? And it's kind of difficult to tell based on 2 game weeks, but he was absolutely brilliant at the beginning of last season, then tailed off from game week 6 onwards. Then it became quite evident that he wasn't justifying that 50 million price tag at the time. But Erling Haaland will score the most goals of any Premier League player if he stays fit. I do back him to win the Golden Boot, and facing Brighton away, he can do the business against the Seagulls, who look quite shaky against Everton in Game Week 2. But having 2 Man City attackers, so to speak, might seem a bit too much actually, and Erling Haaland would be enough, and I wouldn't even mind if you decide to go for Dewsbury Hall or having that sort of 5-point family midfielder like Moises Caicedo or Elliot Anderson instead of Reinders. But I think having both of them could work very well over the next couple of weeks. The saying goes for a talismanic figure in Chris Wood, who is going to rotate from time to time in terms of being subbed off a bit earlier. But we didn't see that in Game Week 2, where we saw Igor Jesus play alongside Chris Wood, and the New Zealand striker got 87 minutes under his belt. He blanked against Crystal Palace, and I'm not too surprised about that. I kind of held off about recommending buying him in Game Week 2, but I think against West Ham that definitely changes because the Hammers have been woeful defensively, and I think Nottingham Forest could score 2 or 3 goals despite a pretty poor pre-season, especially from an offensive perspective. But you've got Ndoye in the midfield who can score a few goals there and be a good Elanga replacement. Hudson-Odoi scored the equaliser against Crystal Palace, and Morgan Gibbs-White will get plenty of bonus points, and I think he'll get more assists than goals, but he can get a nice combination of the two. But the best way of covering Forest defensively is undoubtedly with Chris Wood, and he has started this season very strongly, of course, with that brace against Brentford. And despite having a poor Premier League debut for Chelsea, he was incredible in the Club World Cup, and he got 15 points, of course, against West Ham. I think Joao Pedro is a nice long-term pick, and if Cole Palmer is injured for the next couple of weeks, I think Joao Pedro will fit in very nicely and still do a great job. If he plays as a striker, attacking midfielder, or as a winger, he's going to get plenty of goal contributions, and I think he's going to make that sort of jump in terms of quality and go to the next level, because at Brighton he was decent but scored a lot of penalties last season, and also in the absence of Cole Palmer, Joao Pedro should be on penalties, and I think that bodes well against Fulham at Craven Cottage in the early kickoff, of course, on Saturday. Whilst I might not recommend captaining him in such a fixture, I still think Joao Pedro would be in the top 10 captaincy options on paper, and this 15-man squad has a nice balance to it. You've got that Liverpool attacker, you've also got a Man United attacker, of course, or midfielder in Bruno Fernandes, with so many avenues to points there. You've got a Tottenham attacker in Kudus. Antoine Semenyo is one of the best from a non-top 6 or big 6 club. You've got a double up in Man City with Erling Haaland, who is arguably a better captain than Mohamed Salah, especially for Game Week 3. And you've also got Chris Wood and the Chelsea forward, which I think is very important. There is no Arsenal player in this, and I think if you were to go for one, it would have to be one of their defenders. And Jurrien Timber and Calafiori were brilliant against Leeds, but long term, I don't think they're the most secure in terms of minutes and starts. But that was all discussed, of course, in my transfer tips. Be sure to check that out. And in the next section of this video, I'll be talking about the starting 11 and the captaincy, so you're well prepared for Game Week 3. A few spots are up for grabs, but in goal, I would go for Matt Sells against West Ham as opposed to Dubravka facing Man United away. The back three would compose of Konsa at this moment in time, Pedro Porro and Cucurella, but there's certainly a case to start Daniel Munoz instead of Ezri Konsa in that direct clash that we'll see this weekend. Gakpo, Kudus, Bruno Fernandes and Semenyo is a solid midfield. Haaland, Chris Wood and Joao Pedro completes that front line. Reinders is first on the bench, which could backfire massively, as it did for some people back in Game Week 1. Munoz is second, and Reinildo Mandava or any 4 million defender of your choice is third, and I don't mind Esteve or Goodmanson to be fair, but as I discussed from the very beginning of this season, one key factor in determining my choice of a 4 million defender was the fixtures, but also not having a double up in Burnley defensively, which did very well in Game Week 2, but I think more often than not, that will be quite disappointing, and I would just rather have Dubravka as my Burnley defensive coverage. The expected points is 50.4, and that's with Erling Haaland as the captain. Bruno Fernandes or Chris Wood could take the vice captaincy, and as talked about at the beginning of this video, Chris Wood is third and Fernandes is fourth in those rankings, so I think Chris Wood might have the edge there, but if you look at the algorithms, a lot of them do favour the likes of Bruno Fernandes as the best captaincy option overall, even over Salah and Erling Haaland, and that would increase the expected points to 52.8, which is a massive jump. Let me know down in the comment section below if you agree. Would you go for Bruno Fernandes and Cunha as your captain, or do you think a Salah or Haaland is the way to go for Game Week 3? And the alternative is to have both of them, the two big hitters at 14 million and 14.5. And here you've also got Haaland captain, Salah as the vice this time. The expected points is 49.4, and the other changes include Robert Sanchez in goal over Matt Sells, and Aina will take the place of Marc Cucurella in this defensive line. Ismaila Sarr, who has a brilliant record against Aston Villa, would also come into the midfield at the expense of Antoine Semenyo, and I've also got Reinders in the starting 11 and Matheus Cunha over Bruno Fernandes. So you have to make a few sacrifices if you want to have Salah and Erling Haaland at the same time, and I've gone for Richarlison over Chris Wood, for example, and that's another way of getting the funds necessary to have such big hitters and premiums in this 15-man squad. The bench is basically the same, but I've gone for Josh King as a 4-point family midfielder, and he would just sit on the bench in every single game until we saw more consistency and returns from the 18-year-old. But Reinildo, Richards and Dubravka is also very similar. Of course, Richards does take the place of Daniel Munoz to save 1 million, and there is 0.2 million left in the bank for me, and a few of these players were in my team from the get-go, like Reinders, which helps a lot. Some people watching might not have Reinders and these other players, and you could make some other downgrades if necessary, like Elliot Anderson or Caicedo, which I discussed previously. And if we also went for Cunha as captain or change things out a little bit, so Cunha has 7.07 expected points according to this algorithm, and that means a jump to 51.5 predicted points according to FPL Team. Be sure to use this website. You can visualize future game weeks, which is a great feature of this website. Compare different transfer plans, chip strategies, and much more to optimize your fantasy Premier League teams in the best possible way. A key change from the Transfer Tips podcast recently is that Anthony Gordon is now a sell. That video was recorded before Monday night in that clash between Newcastle and Liverpool, and Anthony Gordon was sent off before the end of the first half, where he had 3 shots in that game, and of course he had 7 against Aston Villa, which I highlighted in that video, but it's still 0 goals and 0 assists. He got -2 points against Liverpool, so he's now down to just 1 point for the season, and his ownership has dipped from 2.5% to 2.1. The next 2 fixtures look very appealing for those Newcastle attackers, and Anthony Gordon playing as the false 9 or striker was definitely very appealing, but now I would lean towards the likes of Elanga and also Harvey Barnes, who might be the best of the lot for the next couple of game weeks. The likes of Bruno Guimaraes can get DEFCON, and he got that goal against Liverpool yesterday, and he definitely has a lot of avenues to points, and he's one of the best midfielders in the Premier League. But Gordon will miss the next 3 game weeks now. His return will be against Arsenal at home in Game Week 6, and of course there are back-to-back home games at that stage with Nottingham Forest at St James's Park in Game Week 7. But Gordon is now a clear sell, and that is a shame. Some people went early on this transfer, and that's why I always recommend, if possible, don't chase those price rises too much. I know it can sometimes pay off, but you've also got these scenarios where you get a suspension, injury, or something else happens. Maybe someone else gets injured in your team, and that becomes a priority. So I think information is always more important than price changes, and there are still 10 other players discussed in that video where those classifications remain the same now, and I would urge you to watch that podcast to have the full coverage of Game Week 3 and knowing the best thing to do with your FPL teams in terms of buying, holding, selling, and skipping certain players. There's even a 1-week punt who I think will do really well in Game Week 3, and check out the team selection video, which will be on your way very soon. I'll cover my Cole Palmer plans and some different transfers for the long term. And if you want to see a predicted lineups podcast followed by a free hit squad or vice versa, then let me know down in the comment section below, and be sure to like this video and get it to the 200 likes and subscribe to my channel. We're closing in on 35,000 subscribers and we recently hit 34k. Hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, whether it's for FPL or UCL Fantasy. The Champions League will return on this channel very soon after that draw is made this Friday. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships. You can find me by typing patreon.com/FPL Dylan and clicking the join button on YouTube. There's also my Discord server, FPL League, Spotify, and the FPL Challenge League. Leave a 5-star review, of course, on my Spotify and podcast formats. It goes a long way to supporting the channel. I'll see you very soon for more FPL content, and that includes the deadline stream on Saturday.